Thanks again for joining me today, folks. My name's Luke Vandermillen. I'm a member of the new business development team here at PlanFees. Today, I'm really excited to show you some of the resources that we've developed that can help advisors win and retain business through the fee benchmarking process. So today, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of fee benchmarking, how exactly you can benchmark fees, and what resources you have available to you. So to get started here, we'll take a look at the agenda. So to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about my company, PlanFees, and what exactly we do, how we got started. And then we'll get into the benchmarking process, how to build a prudent process to benchmark your plans for both prospects and current clients. We'll look at positioning that fee benchmarking reports, those different types of fee benchmarking reports. We'll look at positioning those in different ways to help you with your practice. We'll do a quick demo of some of the PlanFees resources that are available. And then we'll end out with a Q&A and a special offer for the folks that are attending this webinar today. But again, really excited to share some of this information for you. I think any really retirement advisor that is looking to grow their practice at any sort of scale, annual benchmarking and fee benchmarking are two things that need to be considered and utilized for that to be an effective growth process for the advisor. Before I get started here, I also want to mention, feel free to type any questions in the chat as we go. I'll try to monitor the chat as we go along here. There's a Q&A section right here in Zoom. So feel free to type any questions while I'm going through them. I'll keep an eye out for them and try to answer them as we go. And then we'll have a second at the end here to wrap everything up. But let's go ahead and get started. So really today, what I want to stress about the fee benchmarking process is, we're not trying to rewrite the book in terms of how to benchmark a retirement plan. What we're really trying to do is help advisors save time in their sales and their servicing process for their clients. So whenever they're benchmarking fees, we don't want an advisor to take so much time that it takes away from other revenue driving activities, whether it's prospecting, meeting with other clients. Really what we want to do is leverage the technology that we've created here at PlanFees to help advisors make a concise and compelling fee benchmarking report that they can use for both clients and prospects. So again, getting started a little bit about PlanFees. So PlanFees, we're a subscription fintech platform that was created in late 2018. And really what we're trying to do is help advisors fulfill their fiduciary responsibility with benchmarking plans. If you talk to any ERISA attorney or even an industry expert, they'll all kind of come to you with the same sentiment in terms of an advisor's job is to determine the reasonableness of fees that a retirement plan is paying. Now, the tricky part of that is that the ERISA code does not define what reasonable is. And so that's up to the plan sponsor and the advisor to determine what's reasonable. One of the things that we're expecting to see in the next few years is an influx of lawsuits related to participants paying excessive fees for their retirement plan. Morningstar did a study a couple years ago, and one of their findings was that a lot of retirement plans out there in the marketplace right now are paying such excessive fees that it outweighs the tax benefits for a young employee to invest in it. And that's just not how 401k plans or 403b plans or really any sort of retirement plan should be set up. And so what an advisor needs to do is create a structured and prudent process with benchmarking the fees so that, God forbid, if ever a lawsuit came up with one of your clients, you would very quickly be able to say, here's our process. We benchmark the fees. This is why we're staying with this certain provider. This is why we have these certain investments. And really, that can be the difference between winning and losing that lawsuit. And so PlanFees, we set out to kind of create a concise and easy way for advisors on an annual or on-demand basis to benchmark their retirement plan fees. fees. And we have a strong belief here at PlanFees that an advisor's time is incredibly valuable. And so the more time we can save you on the operational and report creation side of things, it leaves you more time to strategize how to grow your practice, reaching out to prospects, preparing those kind of materials, things that will actually bring in revenue for your practice. And we believe PlanFees can help you do that. So starting with what PlanFees benchmarks, we take a look at retirement plans through what we call the PlanFees prism. And really, there's kind of two ways you can look at a retirement plan through PlanFees. On the left-hand side, you see the PlanFees prism, which is originally when we rolled out PlanFees, what we allowed advisors to do was benchmark investment costs, administration costs, record-keeping costs, and even advisor fees against plans of a similar size. So what's the low, average, and high investment costs for plans between $3.5 and $6.5 million with 50 participants? We allow advisors a customizable benchmark that can be created in just seconds, less than 2 minutes for the whole process, to easily bring that up. And so what our advisors have found is that it's incredibly easy for them, even just, if they're talking to their plan sponsor or a prospect and saying, hey, are our fees reasonable? Or how can I tell if our fees are reasonable? The advisor can just pull up the PlanFees website and then in 45 seconds to a minute can have a really nice, clean benchmarking report that they feel comfortable presenting to their client or prospect, but also that has verified and concise data from some of the industry's top providers. So that's the Prism side of things. In terms of advisor fees and services, one of the things that we found after rolling out the PlanFees Prism report is that the conversation around advisor fees and compensation is much more nuanced than taking a look at just the figures themselves. If an advisor, let's say, is charging a client 25 basis points and they end up on kind of the low end of that spectrum where most advisors are charging, let's say, 35 and up, that advisor could take just those figures to his client and say, hey, we're charging a reasonable amount. Here's how I stack up versus my competitors here. So we should be all good. But one of the things that we thought of is that the service model of an advisor should be taken into account when a plan is being benchmarked. So how often is that advisor offering investment due diligence? How often is that advisor benchmarking a plan? What kind of fiduciary education does the advisor offer? Is there any sort of participant education or financial wellness program in place? All of those things need to be taken into consideration when discussing advisor compensation. And so we created the PlanFees Prism 365 report that goes over advisor fees and services. It's the only report in the industry that benchmarks the frequency of advisor services, which really sets a lot of advisors apart in terms of how often they're doing committee meetings and things like that. So that's kind of the two ways we look through the PlanFees Prism, if you will, to evaluate and benchmark retirement plans. So like I mentioned earlier, PlanFees is created to be an on-demand and concise and revealing report structure that you can utilize really just at a moment's notice. So PlanFees is integratable with laptops, iPhones, mobile apps, all of that's available. So even if you're just sitting there in a meeting on your phone, you could pull something up and then send it to your plan sponsor and take a look at the fees right then and there. So easily to run in under 2 minutes for the benchmark. And then we also wanted it to be revealing. One of the things with the benchmarking resources that are available right now in the marketplace is that there's somewhat of a tug of war between reports that are very time intensive and take quite a bit of the advisor's time, and then the reports that are compelling and then that don't really do much for the plan sponsor. And so if you think about it in a visual perspective, you'd want your benchmarking resource to fall somewhere in the quick and concise, but also compelling section of that spectrum. And we believe we've done that with PlanFees by allowing advisors to really easily, these reports are just, 5 or 8 pages long, to break that down in a really digestible way for the plan sponsor to say, here's how your record keeping fees stack up, here's how your investment fees stack up, et cetera. So with that background there, talking a little bit about plan fees, let's talk a little bit more about the benchmarking process itself. So in the past, most advisors typically relied on live bid RFPs to satisfy their benchmarking requirements for their plan sponsors. And one of the problems with that is that that can be a really hard way for a plan sponsor to digest the information. We've all taken a look at those quotes that record keepers provide. And even if they are easy to read, they can be a little bit nuanced in terms of, how are the investment expenses stacking up? How do the record keeping expenses stack up? And so one of the things that we believe is that an advisor on an annual basis should be benchmarking those fees to make sure that they're still in line with the industry, and really that they're more in line with plans of similar sizes. And so really the first step with the fee benchmarking process is going to be identifying your fees, getting your hands on a fee disclosure. And this goes for plan sponsors or prospects. Getting your hands on a 408B2 or even sometimes a 5500 can be just enough information you need to take a look at the plan. And then comes the next spot that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier is what's reasonable? How do you determine reasonableness? And that's where we believe that PlanFees comes in as an annual benchmarking resource that allows in those off years where you're not conducting a live bid RFP and getting quotes from other record keepers. We believe that this PlanFees, both of the reports that are available, are a great way to satisfy that need to determine reasonableness. So it looks like we have a question here. What are the minimum inputs needed to perform a fair evaluation? Where can these inputs be found? Every record keeper seems to have their own way of disclosing or not disclosing real numbers. That's a great question. So one of the things that we've found here through our research at PlanFees is that a lot of advisors tend to heavily rely on 5,500 data to determine what fees are. And while that can be an effective way to do things, especially in a pinch, we strongly believe that if you're benchmarking a plan for either a client or a prospect, you should be getting your hands on the 408B2 disclosure that every record keeper is required to provide a plan sponsor. And that clearly states all of the annual fees that a plan is paying, and even some incidental type charges for that plan as well. So we really recommend getting to a 408B2. You can usually pull them directly off of the provider website, or you can just go to the relationship manager for a plan and say, hey, can you please send us the 408B2? That's always going to give you the information that you need. So again, kind of going back to that visual that I talked about with fee benchmarking, you have a lot of resources out in the marketplace right now that either take too long, they're inaccurate, they're too expensive, or it's just an actual book. And in 2021, I don't think a client would be all too impressed if you lugged in your backpack and pulled out the Farmer's Almanac to benchmark the retirement plan. But really, when we saw this at PlanFees, we saw that there was kind of a market inefficiency in terms of a solution that's both quick and easy for advisors to use, but also has verified and important data for plan sponsors to know. And so looking at the spectrum of benchmarking reports that we have out in the industry right now, you have your x-axis, which is how much time does the advisor need to take creating this report, and the y-axis here, which how compelling is it to the plan sponsor? A report is great if it's fast and really pretty with nice colors, but if the information isn't compelling to the plan sponsor, it's wasted time. And so with the benchmarking resources that are out there, we have, in the lower right quadrant here, easy to use, but doesn't lead to desired results like winning new business or lowering fees and driving participant outcomes. So a lot of things that I've seen advisors do. Now, I promise I have talked to advisors who have actually done this before, as well as some participants. Googling how much does my 401k cost? Just in case you're curious, that Google search brings over 10 million hits with a lot of varying data. So you might have participants or plan sponsors who are in charge of retirement plans. They don't know how to determine the reasonableness of their fees. So they're just going to go to their old friend Google, like they're trying to learn how to tie a bow tie or something like that. And then we have our, classic book materials, which are great and do have good information, but it's not presentable to a client, and it's also information that's static in a specific set of time. So as soon as a couple months passes, that information in the book might already be outdated. And so we want to provide advisors with a database that's constantly updating so that the information is accurate and relevant to that time where the advisor is benchmarking the report. Our top left quadrant here is going to be those compelling reports that also take a lot of time to create. And this is probably the most popular one I see with advisors creating benchmarking reports. Just going, the old school spreadsheet, getting the quotes and typing in the different line items, which is an effective way to benchmark retirement plans. It's incredibly time consuming and almost impossible to do for prospects. But it's really any sort of live bid system that you have, even if it's not on a spreadsheet. If it's something where you're using a resource to gather quotes virtually and then compiling them into a report, more often than not, those are going to be more on the time intensive side. And are going to lead, again, they're not great for prospecting. It's more just to fulfill that ERISA duty of every 3 to 5 years, benchmark the fees of the plans. Getting towards the middle, more where we want to be, is the great reports that doesn't lead to any actual change. So this is something that's becoming more and more popular that we're seeing in our industry right now, is kind of small fintech startups that are offering reports that on the surface level seem like a great idea and seem really easy for an advisor to use, but the data just isn't there to drive the outcomes that the advisor is looking for. And then going into, in-depth benchmarking or quick proposal systems, you'll see a lot of those in the industry in terms of what to utilize. And then in the top right corner, if any of you are familiar with how these graphs work, this is where you want to be, the holy grail. I might be a little bit biased here, but PlanFees provides that holy grail for you in terms of a concise and compelling report that's going to drive participant outcomes and help positively affect change in plans. That's also quick and easy for an advisor to utilize. So that's where we stand as PlanFees. So taking a look at benchmarking best practice. So we consult a lot of our internal ERISA industry experts here on what's best practices for benchmarking a plan. And this is more looking at the current client side of things. We'll talk about prospecting in just a moment here. But in terms of best practices, we recommend that you conduct benchmarking annually and compare to industry averages of plans of a similar size. For a live bid or gathering quotes, you're either going to want to do that every 3 to 5 years, or when you sign on a new client, just to make sure that everything's in line. And then advisor fee benchmarking. There's a couple of different ways that this can be done. What we've been seeing in the marketplace is that most advisors benchmark their fees for internal purposes, or upon a client's request, if they want to talk about the service model that the advisor is providing or where do the fees stack up. It's a nice way to have kind of an on-demand report that covers all those areas. So talking about annual fee benchmarking here. So annual fee benchmarking, quick, easy, compelling, concise. On the left-hand side, this is actually a page that I pulled from our PlanFees Prism report. And like I mentioned earlier, this report benchmarks investment, record keeping, administration, and advisory costs. So you can see here on the graph on the left-hand side, we can take a look and say, okay, the investment costs are sort of towards the high here. You'll see the PlanFees Prism breaks out the data set in a low, average, and high, which represent the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile of the data set that you're looking at. And if you take a look at the top here, this advisor is benchmarking a $5 million plan with 50 participants, looking at plans between $3.5 and $6.5 million. It's about 2,200 plans in that section for the PlanFees universe. And this advisor, all they had to do was type in the investment record keeping and advisor costs here, and it creates this benchmark for them in seconds. And so if this advisor was presenting this report to one of their plan sponsors, or even a prospect for that matter, they could take a look and say, okay, it looks like your current advisory fees are in line with the low, average, and high, kind of right around the average there. But the record keeping charges are 80 basis points, and the high, or the 75th percentile of this universe, is 78. And so that means they're on the very, very end of that spectrum. And so what that can do for an advisor is open up the doors and kind of let the prospect or plan sponsor know, hey, maybe we need to reevaluate our record keeper situation, whether that's gathering live bids, whether that's asking for a concession from the current record keeper, or possibly restructuring how the fees are paid. And then lastly, with investments, obviously that can open doors to a conversation around, hey, your investment costs are high. Well, we actually have access to these low cost CITs available. We can look at doing a passive index strategy and save you X amount of dollars. And so what we're really trying to do is shed light on this for the plan sponsor so that they can identify where the problem areas might be with their plan. The plan sponsor is not going to know there's an issue with their plan until it's brought up from an industry expert like yourselves on this call. And so this PlanFees Prism report is a really easy way to do that and kind of start that conversation with both clients and prospects. In terms of benchmarking advisor fees and services, again, this is a look at the PlanFees Prism 365 report. So again, this is taking a look at the advisor fees and the service frequencies that the advisor provides. And what you can see here is that basically all the advisor has to do is kind of create their service model within PlanFees, and I'll show you how to do that towards the end of the presentation here. But really the point of this would be for an advisor to take a look at their service model and compare it versus the industry. So for instance, this report is taking a look at the same plan we were looking at previously, 5 million, plans between 3.5 and 6.5 million. You can see on the far left-hand side, this advisor offers annual fee benchmarking, a live bid RFPs as part of their base compensation, and they don't charge additionally for any of these fees. And then you could see what the benchmark in terms of the industry shows. So 83% of advisors include annual benchmarking in their base compensation. 13% charge additionally for it. 4% don't offer it at all. And so again, you can kind of see with this report where it's leading to. Again, it's kind of a conversation starter. So if I was presenting this to a prospect, one of the first things that I'd want to point out on this page is, how often is your plan being taken out to bid? Oh, it's only been taken out to bid every 5 years. Okay, well, we can maybe take that up to 3 years to make sure that your pricing stays more competitive. Are you getting offered annual benchmarking at all? Most likely not, or it's being an additional charge. And so with this frequency of live bid RFP table, you can see at the bottom here, if I was an advisor that offers annual fee benchmarking, I'd point right over here and say, hey, only 5% of advisors are offering annual benchmarking annually. So it's something that you can point out to your service model to say, hey, I'm a high level advisor. My price might be a little bit higher than the average fee, but you pay a premium price for premium service. And so that's the way we kind of see this Prism 365 report being positioned by our advisors. And then lastly, the in-depth live bid analysis, which I think we're all familiar with here. And really this is about as nitty gritty as you'll get with fee benchmarking with a client or prospect. Typically, these in-depth live bid reports are, like I said earlier, very time consuming, but they have great information, and there's a lot of great tools out in the marketplace right now that allow you to really seamlessly get quotes from different record keepers. RPAG has a great provider analysis tool. There's some other ones in the marketplace as well, but really this is for that every 3 to 5 years that you're presenting to your clients or prospects. And then you're also you can charge this as project work for a prospect. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but if this was something that you're going to run for a prospect, this might be a way for you to earn some extra revenue on top of that. And we'll get to that in just a minute here. So some considerations that an advisor and a plan sponsor need to be taking a look at. And by the way, a plan sponsor should be aware of all these things and be able to answer all of these questions when asked. So if you ever come across a plan sponsor, for instance, who can't answer who pays the investment costs or who pays the record keeping costs, is it taken out of participant accounts? Is there a flat fee? How is it paid? How is it paid? And then what's the best pricing model for this plan? So is this a plan that maybe that the fee should be paid out of 12B1 or revenue sharing fees? Should the participants handle the investment cost? Should it be paid by the plan? There's a lot of different routes that an advisor and plan sponsor can go when talking about these different fees. And so really what we're trying to do here is frame the conversation for the plan sponsor to make sure that they're aware of everything that they need to be aware of. So what should you be benchmarking, right? So investment fees. This is probably the most commonly benchmarked piece of a retirement plan. Anytime an advisor is running investment due diligence, there's a pretty good chance that the fees of those investments is going to be brought up. So, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual investment reviews will typically at least touch on investment fees. But one of the things that some advisors tend to kind of leave on the back burner is the administrative fees. So not only what is the record keeper charge to run the plan, but what kind of communications charges do they have? Is there any sort of additional compliance fees in terms of incidental charges that the plan can incur? And that's typically either paid for the plan sponsor, by the plan sponsor, or by the participants. So again, something to take a look at with your plan sponsor to see if they're aware of this. And then lastly, advisory fees. So this is typically used for prospecting type conversations where you might be able to go in and say, hey, what's your current advisor charging? What kind of services are they offering you? Well, I actually charge less money or just the same and offer twice the amount of services. And that's where things like the Prism 365 report come in. And again, there's a conversation around who pays the advisor compensation. Is it taken out of participant accounts? Is it paid for by the plan sponsor? So a couple different things that impact the pricing of a particular plan, and I don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but really, I think it's just important to stress that there's really no stone that can be left unturned, especially in those live bid provider analysis RFP type situations where you want to be taking a look at the financials of the plan. How complex is the plan design? What kind of funds is the plan using? Is there any sort of educational support for participants? That's something that we're seeing a huge shift towards in our industry right now, is a much more concentrated emphasis on education for or for participants. And so does this advisor offer, one-on-one meetings with participants? Do they offer any sort of educational materials, et cetera? And then a couple last things to consider when you're looking at a plan or benchmarking a plan versus benchmarking a provider. So when you're looking at a plan, you need to take into consideration size, the service requirements, and the investment needs. And so, we all know that, working with plan sponsors, some plan sponsors, their number one goal is to say, hey, I want to run a plan that gives the best returns to my participants, or I need a plan where any of our participants can call up our advisor and get them on the phone, or how big is the plan, how many participants, et cetera. And then looking at providers, does the provider service the demographic that your plan falls under? What are that provider's strength and experience? And then what kind of capabilities does that provider have? Is there a robust participant login where they can go and view all the information for their plan? Is there a support line that the participant can call to talk about their account? All those things should be taken into consideration. And on top of that, not only should these things be taken into consideration when you're servicing a current client, but these are also all different avenues that you can go down with a prospect to say, how much do you know about your retirement plan? Are all the T's crossed or all the I's dotted? And so this is just a couple of different things that we see in the marketplace that advisors should be benchmarking. And so, I'm kind of a results guy myself. We can talk all we want about, participant outcomes and, how effective certain things are. But really, what I think is important is taking a look at an actual case here of one of the advisors that utilizes PlanFees and how they won new business here. So last year we had an advisor who was working with a prospect that was a professional services firm with about 200 participants, about $12 million in the plan. And the prospect was linked up with the advisor because the prospect had two main objectives in mind. We want to know where our provider is receiving compensation, and we want to determine if that compensation is reasonable. So the advisor said, okay, we'll go through this process of identifying all the different revenue sources and then also quantify that data and compare it to a benchmark. So the advisor got to work. First thing that they did, just like we were looking at in that fee benchmarking process slide a few back, is getting those fees. And so this advisor went ahead and said, hey, can you get me a copy of your fee disclosure? And the prospect said, I don't know where to get that. And so the advisor went ahead and pulled off the 5,500 from there's a litany of 5,500 search capabilities that come in the industry. Larkspur, Extrema, things like that are available. But again, like I said earlier, what you're really driving at is to get a copy of the plan's 408B2. And the reason why that's important is because the 408B2 lays out in the most easy for an advisor or even a plan sponsor to understand way of all the different revenue sources that a plan or a record keeper is receiving through a plan. And so, things with 5,500s, you can usually get the lineup information, maybe some of the plan design and investment features. But if you're looking for a really in-depth look at the plan's record keeping charges, how the charges are paid, you're going to want to get your hands on a 408B2 disclosure. So after a little fuss with the participant or the prospect, the advisor was able to get his hands on the 408B2 to make sure that they had the most current data. And then what they did was input that data into the PlanFees Prism. And so what they essentially did was create a custom benchmark for this prospect, again, in under 5 minutes, to take a look at the different sections of their plan to see what's reasonable, what's not. And so actually, let me go back real quick here. So in terms of the benchmark, you can see here, looking at a total cost perspective, this plan's already on the high end here, getting close to that 136 for the 75th percentile. But just looking at this graph here, you would say, okay, it's between the average and the high. Alarm bells aren't ringing. Maybe it's just kind of on the higher side of things. But then starting to segment that out in the different areas that we were looking at, you can see this plan has a really low investment cost. So what the advisor found out was that this plan had mostly index funds in it, and so it was how to keep the investment costs down, which is what was being communicated to the participants of this plan. But when they looked at the record keeping charges, they saw that the current plan was all the way at 82. And according to the benchmark through PlanFees, the 75th percentile or the high is only 59. And so this advisor was able to go to this prospect and say, hey, you're paying, 23 extra basis points, which is several thousands of dollars for a $12 million plan. Have you taken a look at maybe shopping your plan around to different record keepers, restructuring your fees? And so that was a moment where the prospect said, okay, maybe we need to take a look at something different. And so the advisor kind of zeroed in on that. And this is, again, a page from the actual PlanFees Prism report, but it lays it out in a really easy to digest way for plan sponsors. Just taking a look at, here's our investment cost versus the low, average, and high. Here's our record keeping cost versus the low, average, and high. It shows it in both a basis point and dollar amount. So you're really easy way to communicate the value of your services to a prospect or even a current client through this report. And then once that advisor notified the prospect of that their plan was so high on the record keeping side, the prospect actually hired the advisor to run a project only RFP live bid where they actually took the plan out to bid and got different quotes from different record keepers in the industry. And so once the advisor actually did that, they were able to get a holistic picture of not only what the current plan is charging, but how much the plan could save by moving to a different record keeper. And what's interesting, what actually happened with this scenario is that the advisor went out and gathered bids from 3 of the current record keeper's biggest competitors, and then went back to the current record keeper and said, hey, we've gotten quotes from provider A, B, and C, who are your largest competitors, and they are all coming in much under your current pricing for this plan. And we'd like to offer you a concession, because the prospect was happy with their current service that they were getting. They just thought that they were paying too much for it. And the prospect, or the record keeper, came back, lowered the fee by a few basis points. The prospect ended up staying at their current record keeper, but still saving some money. So it was kind of a win-win. And then, I bring this slide up just because I think it's important to kind of stress and analyzing the investment fees. So not only taking into account the straight rev or the expense ratio that we're all familiar with, but also taking a look at the revenue sharing, how that revenue sharing is applied, whether it's credited back to participants, whether it's used to offset fees, whether it goes into an ERISA budget. There's a bunch of different things that can happen. But this is an example of one of the things that you can point at with a client and show them actual quantifiable information to say, here's how much money I can save you. And again, just taking a look at isolating those plan cost components, you can get a really good look, especially with a live bid type scenario, of all the bidders in that plan space, and then how that stacks up versus the current pricing. So looking at investment costs here, record keeping costs. So once this advisor had taken this plan out to bid, they saw, oh, okay, well, there's a potential $60,000 in savings here, which, I mean, if you're trying to drive positive participant outcomes for a plan sponsor, saving them over 60 grand is a great way to do that. And so really at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here at PlanFees is maximize a plan sponsor's negotiating leverage. We want the advisor and the plan sponsor to have all of the arrows in their quiver that are going to be necessary to go to the negotiating table with either a current or prospective record keeper and be able to get a fair and reasonable deal from that record keeper, and also get the service that particular record keeper or that particular plan sponsor requires. So we've gone through all of the different kind of whys of PlanFees and hows, but what I want to take a look at now is the actual resources, because I've been telling you all about how easy the resources are to use, but I'd like to show you here and prove how quick and easy it is. So if we actually, let me pull up the internet here. So I pulled up the 2 different PlanFees reports that are available through the PlanFees website. And the first is that PlanFees Prism report here that I have pulled up on the screen. So you can see with the PlanFees Prism report, the advisor is only required to put in about 6 data points, depending if there's a TPA or not. So the advisor puts in client's name, the assets, number of participants, and then the investment record keeping and advisor fees right there. And the site will automatically create a benchmark based on the information that's put above. And so we're looking at a $4.5 million plan with about 200 participants. And you can see here, the site suggests looking at plans between $3.1 and $5.8 million. This is customizable by the advisor, so they'd easily be able to change this to say plans between 2 and 10 million, or 2.5 and 7 million. It's completely customizable by the advisor. And there can also be an additional filter added in terms of looking at the plan participant count. So we want to look at plans between $3 and $6 million that also have between 100 and 200 participants. And so this is all easy to use. And then the information here at the very bottom is going to dynamically change as the advisor changes the information. So as they change the asset band and things like that, all this information is going to download. And then once the advisor is ready to present this to a client or prospect, just hit this download Prism report button at the very bottom. The report's going to download in just a matter of seconds, and then the advisor can go ahead and present it. So again, less than 2 minutes here, 6 data points here, very easy to use. And then lastly, the Prism 365 report that I mentioned earlier that benchmarks advisor fees and services and the frequency of those services. Again, really easy for an advisor to create: client name, total plan assets and participants. And then really all an advisor needs to do is input their current advisor compensation. So this advisor is receiving 40 basis points for advising on this plan. And then the PlanFees Prism 365 report actually provides that advisor with a core service model. And the advisor just goes through and selects whether a certain service is included in that 40 basis points, they charge additionally for that service, or the service is not offered at all. And then lastly, how frequently does that service happen? Is it quarterly, semi-annually, or annually? So you can see here, taking a look at investment analysis services, provider benchmarking, fiduciary services, plan committee education and training, and then lastly, the employee engagement services. The advisor just has to answer these 14 multiple choice questions here, and then they can also add in some value added services as well. So anything that would be proprietary to their own firm. And then just like the other report, click a button and you get your low, average, and high for plans of a similar size. With this particular report, the bands are not customizable because of how tied the data is to the different asset ranges. So you see for the Prism 365 report, it's going to automatically select an asset range for you. So this is looking at plans between $2.5 and $5 million. So to wrap things up here, and again, folks, I really appreciate your time today and taking a look at this with me. The PlanFees reports are available to you for either $49 a month for either or of the reports. So if you just want the Prism report or just want the Prism 365 report, it's going to be about $49 a month. If you want the bundle for the report, it's going to be $69 a month, which comes around to about $820 a year. And we actually have a special offer today for the folks that attended here. So any of you who attended the webinar today, if you want to sign up for PlanFees, you can get a 25% discount on your PlanFees subscription. So saving a couple dollars here just by attending this webinar and sitting through this from me. So we're really excited to offer this. This is only a limited time offer, so please reach out to me if you're interested in taking a look at PlanFees. I'm happy to schedule a one-on-one demo with anyone, answer any questions on a one-on-one basis if need be. But any of my contact information is available here. I'll be sending this presentation out as a follow-up item to all of the registrants of this webinar. So you can find all of my contact information in the back of the report here. But with that being said, that's kind of the end of my presentation. So I wanted to open up the floor to any sort of questions that come up here with the PlanFees reports or anything that has to do with benchmarking. I'll go ahead and see if there's anything in the chat here. Okay, so we got a question here. Where does the data come from for the PlanFees Prism universe? That's a great question. So the PlanFees Prism universe is actually, the data set is different for the two different reports that we offer. The PlanFees Prism report that benchmarks investment record keeping and administration fees, that's actually provided to us from an industry partner that has a live bid provider analysis resource. And so once a provider submits their pricing through that provider, the live bid resource that our partner utilizes, they send it over to us. We scrub the data to make sure everything's accurate and looks in line, and then we insert it into our database. And then for the Prism 365 report that I mentioned that benchmarks advisor fees and services, that's going to be actually comprised of a survey that we conducted at the end of 2020 from about a couple thousand or 1,000 advisor firms were included in the survey. We have fee data from about 20,000 plans and frequency data from about 10,000 plans. So it's really concise and accurate information that we're providing through the PlanFees Prism. Right. We have another question here. How can I sign up for PlanFees? Two different ways you can sign up for PlanFees. The first being you can go directly on the PlanFees website and sign up with your credit card right there. I'll be sending a discount code out to all the attendees of this webinar. So you can type in that discount code right there and get your 25% off your subscription. Or you can contact me and we're happy to create a contract for you if you'd like to be invoiced or something like that. So we're really kind of flexible in terms of how to sign up, but just feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. All right, looks like there are no more questions in the chat here. So again, folks, feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you want to talk one-on-one about PlanFees. If you want me to do a live demo of creating the report or review the actual physical report, I'm happy to do so. But again, I thank you so much for taking your time. I know how busy you all are. And like I said earlier, we know how valuable an advisor's time is. So I greatly appreciate y'all taking the time out of your day to join. Look for an email from me before the end of today as a follow-up. And I'm available until about 6:30 p.m. Central Time to answer any questions that you have. But have a great rest of your day and have a good rest of your week.